Welcome to devlog number 3. I'm Danny Weinbaum, founder of Eastshade Studios, and technical director, among other things, of Songs of Glimmerwick, which is our up-and-coming Witch Academy RPG, where magic is cast through music. We're a small team of 3 full-timers plus a few contractors, dedicated to making games with a focus on setting, and committed to designing games with rich, progress-driven mechanics that don't involve killing people. This episode is going to be all about our character pipeline. Not their design, which is Jacqueline's territory and of course a deep topic in its own right, but how we bring them to life, and how we make so darn many of them with a super tiny team. The world of Glimmerwick has a ton of characters. The world is already at over 100 unique NPCs, and that doesn't include the fact that some of them have multiple looks. A lot of them talk, and everyone who talks will eventually be fully voiced. The player character is also fully customizable. So needless to say, we had our work cut out for us. We knew we wanted to make a lively world, so we knew we needed the character production pipeline to be as painless as possible. We eventually got there, but it took us a while to figure out the right mix of workflows to where A, the player could be fully customizable, B, a certain number of NPCs could share a full animation set, as in we didn't want to author a new walk animation for new characters, and C, Jacqueline had the freedom to draw free and create really unique characters with non-standard proportions and in poses that didn't fit our primary rig. What we eventually came to was sort of 2 pipelines, one for characters that could do all the shared animations, move in any direction, etc., and one for secondary characters that really don't have schedules, so don't require the full animation set, and don't require multiple angles. When we started production, we were faced with the major decision of whether we were going to do traditional animation, where each frame is drawn like a flipbook, or skeletal animation, where a rig of bones is made for the characters, and the bones are animated, with software interpolating the in-betweens. In the world of 2D, traditional animation looks better, plain and simple. There's also no restrictions on the poses and what kind of foreshortening you can do with the limbs. It's pretty much just whatever you can draw, which is of course anything. But we had this problem of wanting to let the player and NPCs customize their appearance. Here's some math. If we have 3 different angles of the character, and we have say 5 outfits, and 10 player animations, well that's 3 times 5 times 10 equals 150 individual animations, each potentially with anywhere from 10 to 100 frames. That doesn't even consider hairstyles, face shapes, eyebrows, or any of the other modifications you can do to your player character. So yeah, traditional animation quickly revealed itself to be out of the question. So we're using a middleware called Spine for skeletal animation, and that's gone really well. Jacqueline has to draw each feature from 3 or sometimes 4 angles and attach it to the appropriate bones, paint the weight so it deforms properly, and then all our existing animations work on it, just like in a 3D game. We already have 15 outfits, 30 hairstyles, and a bunch of other customizable goodies. A few years into production, we learned one particular trick that single-handedly blew open the scope of the game in terms of our ability to create unique characters. It's really hard to introduce new quest ideas without new NPCs, so this trick significantly reduced the cost of new quests. When I say what it is, you'll probably be like, duh, that's really simple. But surprisingly, we didn't even consider it until years into production. A lot of characters in the game don't ever move. They're either in one spot during the day, and gone at night, nowhere to be found, or just perpetually in one spot. So they really only need one pose and 2 or 3 animations. The trick is we don't fully rig all our characters. Jacqueline draws the characters straight in the pose they will be in the game, she chops up only the parts that need to move, and then she sends it to our animator, Misaki. Very talented spine animator, by the way, and available for freelance as far as I know. She creates a custom one-time use rig for the character, which takes her very little time because, well, she slays, but also the rig only needs to accommodate exactly the animations we need, and authors those 2 or 3 animations. This whole process only takes a few days of work between the 2 of them, and then we have an entirely unique NPC with entirely unique animations. Another huge benefit is that it's actually incredibly difficult to put characters in certain poses with skeletal 2D animation. The foreshortening of limbs looks really bad when using simple bone scaling, so it enables us to put NPCs in poses we otherwise wouldn't really be able to do without making the main rig vastly more complicated. It's also very difficult to make rigged NPCs interact with objects in the world. This is the case for any animation pipeline in video games, as anyone who's ever worked with game animations will know well. But if we make a posed custom rigged NPC, we can include the object they're interacting with right in the rig itself as part of the character, which makes it very easy. We mix these so-called secondary characters with our primary ones, who are fully mobile and can walk in all directions, and it fills out the world nicely. It creates a convincing illusion of dynamic and varied NPCs, even though not all of them can technically move. Alright, well I think that's a good summary of our character pipeline, at least with regards to animation. Let's get to some community questions. Real Too Late asks, why did you choose to work with such an old version of Blender? This is a really common one. So the reason I use an old version of Blender is because I wrote a custom exporter for it that I simply can't live without. It doesn't do anything fancy, but it does just export one collada file for each dummy object in my scene, and it combines all of the meshes as far down as they will go to consolidate as many draw calls as possible. And I would have to update that script and potentially rewrite parts of it because the APIs have changed around for the new versions of Blender, and there's just really nothing in the new versions of Blender that I care about enough to do that. AstroCase asks, with your assets, do you use native Blender and Photoshop files in Unity, or do you export FBX/PNG? For Blender files, I use my custom exporter, which writes collada files, or .daes as they're also known. I use that specifically because it is a simpler format and it strips out a bunch of the stuff that I actually don't want coming in. And for Photoshop, we mostly use the PSDs directly. Kirby Chen asks, how did you come up with the ideas for the game that people really want? This is an interesting question. This game is from our hearts. We do stuff we like that tickles our fancy, and also we do stuff that serves our design pillars, and stuff that solves design problems. We are indie through and through. This game is made with our love and our passion, and we have to trust that our own taste will appeal to enough people, and that our love will come through and people will be enchanted by our work. But it's not designed by committee. Random Dude asks, can you tell me where and how to find other devs to work with me? In all honesty, the best way to find people is to have funding. We found our programmer Jenny just by putting some job listings out, and we got over 200 applications from that, and we were able to just pick the best candidate. And if you don't have funding, probably the best way to get funding would be to build something by yourself that will impress a publisher. But other than that, I actually don't recommend trying to team up with people unless you already have a ton of shipped experience and really know what you're doing. I think oftentimes you can just kind of slow each other down, and I very often see people just trying to make teams instead of focusing on their discipline and trying to just get really good at their craft. Like, I worked in AAA for 3.5 years as an environment artist before trying to start my own indie studio. And to get that AAA job, I had to first focus 100% of myself on getting really, really, really good at 3D art. I think it's important to work really hard on your craft and potentially just try to get a job in the industry. Join someone else's project, don't try to start your own. And don't work for free, and I don't think you should ask anyone to work for free either. That's the way I feel about it anyway, personally. Jack of Gears asks, what system are you using for dialogue and quest tracking? First of all, thank you for the kind words. We wrote our own dialogue tool directly within Unity as an editor extension. It's fairly simple data, and we've got an easy way of making callbacks from our conversations to do whatever we need to do. As far as quests, we don't have any mono system for quests because all of the quests in Glimmerwork are so different. We of course have systems for quest logs and notifications and things of that nature, but for the player verbs and objectives, we author the callbacks every time on a quest-by-quest basis, and make whatever changes to the game state required when they're required. So basically they're all hand-wired using simpler components. Our quests are so unformulaic that no generalized template would work for them. Co-Games asks, when working with a small team, how much detail goes into things like game development document? What was the approach for those kinds of things to keep track of the project and scope correctly without overscope? First of all, thank you so much, and thank you for playing Eastshade. We've got a couple different tiers of documentation. The top tier is Jacqueline's Scrivener project. Now, Scrivener is an application mostly for writing novels, but it's basically a giant tome of lore, ideas, bits of design, character backgrounds, etc. And these are the scratchings of a mad woman. That's mostly for her as the lead designer and creative director. Then we have actual design documents, which are more polished documents that contain a lot of the nuts and bolts. So these are reasonably granular descriptions ready for implementation. Sometimes we'll make a design doc that is just a list of changes to an existing system. Iteration is definitely part of our process, and we don't always get it right the first time. As far as scoping correctly, unfortunately I don't have any hard advice for that. We tend to overscope a bit and end up cutting things in the latter half of our development. It's tough, but this pruning can often let us hone in on what's really important in our games. Okay, thank you everyone so much for tuning in. And of course, feel free to drop a question in the comments and it might be featured in next month's devlog. I'm also open to feedback on the format. Do you guys like the community questions sections? Should I do separate videos for those? And of course, I'd love to hear about what kinds of topics you'd be interested in for the coming devlogs. Don't forget to wishlist the game, the link for which is in the description. And other than that, until next time, folks.